Really quick about TC, the interesting thing about them, the main TC roster did not get formed until Season 3 and Season 4. Basically, what that means is Season 1 and Season 2, TC, the organization, had a completely different roster, and they did not put much money into the roster at all in Season 1 and Season 2. So they basically had 0 points accumulated from Season 1 and Season 2. And the team only really started playing at the later half of the year, Season 3 and Season 4, and it's a completely new team. So you think they need time to synergize. You think they wouldn't be a contender until next year. But they actually got so close that they were just one placement away from making it into the GC as a completely new team that only got to play half of the year's points accumulation. Yeah. So you add all of that together. That's why I was so passionate about, TC really should have been there, but they unfortunately were not. We'll see what happens next year. But yeah, that's teams right there. TJB, TC, and
yeah.
I mean, just before you get Ocean, one little again, Zootes, still I'm kind of curious. FPP to TPP transition. Do you think Chinese teams sort of feel it at the back of their mind? I mean, we could have had a few games in GC with the FPP format, because that really annoys me a lot. I'm a really passionate player, especially in terms when it comes down to FPP mode. So talk us through about the same.
Yeah, so FPP, definitely I want FPP and competitive. I think all the competitive players too also want FPP.
Yes, we want that.
And we'll see if it happens. Hopefully Tencent, pushes that through eventually. But as far as FPP versus TPP goes, here's my take on it. So last year, the 4AM and Nova, first and second place, right? And last year they played PEO all in FPP, and then at the very end of the year they switched to TPP. They still dominated, okay? And I think what that allowed the Chinese teams to do and kind of show the rest of the world is, if you know how to take fights correctly, it doesn't matter if it's against TPP. Like, I hear a common complaint, like, we can't take fights because, TPP, they just hide behind, cover, and they could see us, we can't see them, so they have the advantage. But last year, what the Chinese team showed us is like, hey, we practiced all year in FPP, like 4AM, a very aggressive Chinese team. They still took fights with everybody in TPP, and they were dominating, right? It's because they knew how to correctly take fights. So it doesn't matter if it's TPP or FPP. But now this year, I think the difference is back to the TPP thing, right? TPP does have an advantage in defense. I think what happened this year is the global teams just got better. They simply just got better at knowing how to take fights, how to play the game. So you couple that with a TPP advantage if they're playing defensive, it makes it a lot harder for these Chinese teams that are, maybe traditionally more aggressive teams to take advantage of these global teams now in TPP. So there is still that, TPP advantage. That is still definitely a thing. But now it's more apparent because these global teams have had another year to get better at the game. And now the Chinese teams are starting to hit a wall, so to say. Like, it's the way we play, like, it's still correct when we play aggressive, but TPP still has a slight advantage when it comes to, the defensive style, especially if the TPP team plays 100% correctly.
Yeah, I kind of have two questions at this moment, and we talked about FPP and TPP, right? So my first question is, do you feel if we have reached, like, every team, any region, every region, do you feel like we have reached our utmost potential in the way we like the game sense or something? Do you feel like we still are scratching the surface? Because if you talk about previously, if we talk about the first ever PMCU that happened, there was just one thing. You see someone, you shoot, you go in a vehicle, you rush towards it. It was just a basic game. Then we came down to the movements and all. Like, there are drop shots, or maybe one region is really good with the utilities, one region is good with their rushes, and then it's like everyone's just learning each other. So do you feel we have reached to the utmost potential, or maybe this PMGC, it's good. Maybe in next PMGC, we might just see some other things coming out. What, according to you, might just happen in terms of the potential of the players?
Okay, so I think where I think we're still scratching the surface. Like
Yeah.
the meta, teams have developed so much. But one comparison I always really like to make, and this was when I was playing competitive. This was my mindset on how to play competitive at the highest, most optimal level. And it might take, a year or maybe 2 years to get to that level, but here's what I compare it to. So hopefully a lot of the viewers here are familiar with games like CSGO, where it's a 5v5. The map is the same, the angles are the same, everything is the same. No RNG involved, and it all comes down to the team execution and just how precise everything is done. Essentially, that's what CSGO is. It's a 5v5, and the better team is the better team at doing what I just said. Now, PUBG, a lot of RNG involved, right?
Yeah.
It's not just you versus one other team. It's you versus 15 other teams. There's a huge map, circle shifts, so much RNG. But you can still slowly over time break it down into a science, okay? So CSGO, the way I look at it, because everything is always the same maps, 5v5, the players, you almost can break it down to a science to a point where it's like, what team is better than this other team because of these minuscule details, right?
Yeah.
Now, over the years, PUBG Mobile, I think, will shift towards that way. And a very good example, to throw an example out there, is let's just say Circle 1 to Circle 2 and Circle 2 to Circle 3. When you play this game for so many years, you will be able to get the same circles and practice the same circle shifts, and you will be able to fight teams in the same areas more and more and more and more, almost to a point where you get to like that CSGO level type of thing, where it's like you've done this so many times that it becomes a science, and you just really know the fine details of this particular rotation, this particular fight. And with so much RNG, it's hard to achieve that for the whole entirety of the game. But over the course of more years, and as teams get